All right, let's get started for our next portion. So here we have, I'm calling it a master class because we've got two masters here. I want to introduce Britt Deaton and Ben Northern. And Britt and Ben are experienced competitors in this type of stuff. They've both competed in the World Championships in Vegas and they've done quite well. They've got and y'all can ask them about their career journeys if you want when they do Q&A later. But just real briefly, Britt works in the actuarial area, and so she's all about data, and Ben has training as an industrial engineer, and so he thinks about processes a lot, and he lives in spreadsheets. He works for Pilot now, but I'm just going to go ahead and turn this over to them. They're just going to look at the case that y'all just did. I sent it to them earlier this week, and so they both worked through it, and so they're just going to talk a little bit about how they thought about the case, give you some tips on how to work it, and they're here to help you learn how to do more. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. So I'm Ben. My experience is I graduated from the University of Tennessee this past December with a master's in industrial engineering. I was part of UT's Excel Championship team in Vegas this year alongside Beckett and Sarah, and currently working as a project manager at Pilot.
Yeah, and I'm Britt Deaton. I'm currently the AVP of Finance Technology at Unum, so it's an employee benefits life insurance company. Been there for about 10 years, been using Excel a lot all throughout that time, stumbled across the Microsoft Excel World Championship and participated for the first time in 2022, I think is correct, and have just kind of gotten sucked in ever since and participating. So glad to be here, and we'll kind of, I think our idea is to each take points. So Ben's going to take point kind of in this one, kind of walking through his solution, but I'll add some color commentary all throughout, and would certainly love if y'all have questions or thoughts, throughout or at the end to dive in and deeper. But yeah, to Eric's point, here to help you learn and, give you some tips and tricks along the way.
Yeah, so we're just going to start going through the levels first, and then we'll go back and hit on the bonuses at the end. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and interrupt. But let's just get right into it. So starting with level 1. This one is checking for so you're given the ID of the person, and it wants you to find the name associated with it. So you have your user data over here. So all this case is doing, how many of you are familiar with XLOOKUP? That's a very popular function, especially in this case. I used it on just about every level. So you can see up here the formula bar. This is the formula I used for level 1. So it's an XLOOKUP of the ID, and it looks it up on column B to B and returns column C to C. So here's what column B and C are. So column B is the ID that you're given, and column C is the name that you want to return. So if you're familiar with XLOOKUP, it's a pretty simple, just find the ID in the B to B range and return the C to C range. So that's a pretty simple, just XLOOKUP, straightforward level there. Level 2 gets a little bit more challenging. So now it wants how many followings is associated with each ID. So before, you can do your XLOOKUP here, which is basically the same as before, it's just an XLOOKUP, but you have to create a new column to do this one. So we have to create our followings column over here. I did it in column H. So all this is the formula I use, but it's account A of the text split of the followings. So you're given the followings, and each ID is split by a delimiter, which is the slash. Using text split, it'll split every ID in the cell reference of E3 based off the slash. And then you combine that with a count A function, and that'll give you how many counts are actually in that text split. So I can actually show you what text split does on its own. So using just text split, it returns every ID in the range. We gave it the delimiter of the slash, and so that will just give us all of the IDs that are split by that text. And then account A of this formula gives us how many IDs are in that text split.
It's probably worth calling out if you want to go back to that tab. Like, thinking through kind of setup and approach of the problems. So you can see Ben here created kind of those additional columns that he used to help. So using the original data, adding some additional ones, then kind of set it up for him to be able to reference things on that main case tab. So I took a similar approach. I don't know if you want to pull mine up, but I did a table-based approach. Same general concept, but I will just call out like turning data into a table. So, you go into I think it's Control T, right? To create a table is the quick shortcuts. But you can create a table, and then when you're starting to reference it, there's actually some benefits to doing that, which if we show some of my answers later on, I can kind of show you what that looks like. But I actually turned this into a table and was able to add some additional columns, but same general concept of trying to stage up that data as it was needed along the way. So I find that very helpful. And I think the table range, like Ben and I were comparing notes. He doesn't like it. I'm sort of mixed on it. So a lot of things do kind of become that personal preference. You got to learn your style for how you're going to go through these and how best to organize it. So that's kind of one of those examples. Did anybody use a table or anything like that? Anybody create some helper columns like Ben did? Yeah, got some here? Yeah, good.
So that's how we do level 2. And then XLOOKUP at the end, kind of like we did in level 1, but now we're referencing our following column that we just made. Level 3 is, again, pretty similar. So in the end, it's just an XLOOKUP, but we have to create a new column now of followers. So how many followers is associated with this user ID? So this is the formula I used to get the followers. So kind of explaining this formula, so it's a count ifs of column E. And you notice here, our reference is not a direct reference on cell B3, which is the user ID. What I've done here is I sort of concatenated the star symbols with B3. And so what that does is it'll find the cell reference, so B3, where does that appear within a text? So if I just did B3, it gives 0 because it's looking for the B3 cell, it's looking for that exact match. But using the stars around the B3, that'll find just if that cell address exists anywhere in that range. So it just finds if that sequence of characters exists anywhere within each of the cells in the range E to E.
Now, did anybody else come up with an eloquent solution like that? Because I definitely overcomplicated it versus what Ben did. Who else overcomplicated it? Yeah, there's my people.
Yeah, oftentimes it's a lot simpler than you really think it is. And a lot of it is just the familiarity with the formulas and just how Excel works. Once you get more familiar with it, then you can really find ways to keep it simpler.
So the asterisk is, you could use that to find within one cell wherever it shows up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So repeating the question in case anybody couldn't hear, he was asking about the asterisk and being able to put it in here. So that does tie in, to the approximate match.
Yeah. So it just helps you find an indirect reference, basically, of if a string of characters exists anywhere within a range. Is all it's doing.
Yeah, and you can modify it. So he put the stars, the asterisk at the beginning and the end. So it's like anything before and anything after. But if you're looking for something where you're just looking at the last part or just at the first part, you can do the asterisk just before or just after. So that's just giving it a placeholder for like, hey, anything here, any number or even nothing. So that works even if it was the only thing or even if it was the first thing and there's nothing before it or the last thing.
Can you elaborate on that? Is it kind of like a quotation thing, or how's it?
So the way this works is like instead of quotation marks, so the quotation marks around it, that is sort of a concatenation. Combined with the ands. So you can't just put the star B3 star because it gives you an error. It doesn't know what it's looking for because you don't have that cell reference. So that's why you have to use the quotation marks with it and the and symbols to concatenate it into one thing.
Yeah, and if you were typing it, if you were looking for just like that F0500, you would type an entire thing within the double quotes. You'd put quotes star F-0500 star end quotes. The way he set up here is that it's dynamic, so that's working for every row in his data set. Yeah.
Just use a concat function instead of asterisk.
Yeah, so the concat, and really it's the ampersand. So the ampersand and the concat or concatenate functions will behave very similarly, and sometimes they're easier to use. Like if you want to get a whole bunch of things and bring them together, then the concat function is usually a lot easier. If you're building a formula where you're kind of have a small number of things, like I'll tend to default also to the ampersand, but yes, those will be fairly similar, just a little bit of personal preference and sometimes a little bit of, thinking about how many things you're trying to put together. But same general concept. It's a good question.
Are there any other questions on level 3?
Could you guys explain concatenate a little bit more? What's the use of that compared to just any other function that just brings those together, like represents cells together? I'm not really familiar with it.
Yeah, so concatenate, it is just like when you have a range or multiple cell values that you want to combine into one value, that's what it's used for.
Yeah.
So
it's a way you're telling Excel to bring those things together. So if you highlight a range of cells, it's not necessarily going to put those things and kind of stack them together as one thing. It's going to treat it, and that's how you use a dynamic array within a formula. But if you want to bring it together and say, hey, this is one thing, like in this case, what he's trying to bring together are those 3 elements. So he wants to say, those are one thing. I don't want to treat each one separate. So concat or the ampersand brings it together. And that's kind of how you're telling Excel to do that.
And I have another example later on within this case using the concat formula that you'll be able to see. So we'll hit on concat again later. Any other questions with level 3? And then again, it's just an X lookup, but now you're referencing your followings column. So then level 4. So are you an influencer? So this is where this is a good one where you have to really read into the instructions. Reading's a big part of these cases. You have to read the what it's saying and make sure that you get it right. So a lot of times what I like to do is I like to look at the example and follow along with the example and follow the rules that are given within the example. Make sure I'm hitting on everything that it's telling me to do. So how I approach level 4 is we create a new column over here in column L. Is influencer. It's a check to see if this person is an influencer. So my approach to this is an if and function. So I combine an and inside of if, so it'll check for 2 criteria. So first it checks if their followers are greater than 450, which was one of the checks within the rules we're given. And it also checks if they have twice as many followings as followers. So those are the 2 rules that we have to make sure exists for this person to be an influencer. And if both of these exist, it'll return a yes, otherwise it'll return a no. You can use 1 and 0 binary, any sort of language, true, false works. But I just defaulted to yes, no here. But it's an if and, so the and makes sure that both criteria exists.
Yeah. And if you'll switch over to my case file real quick, because I think this is a good time to note, kind of like that table stuff. I can go to the case and scroll down to part 4. Because the way I set it up, this kind of shows a decision point that you'll have to regionalize competitions is do you take the route of, hey, going back to that data tab and adding additional columns to meet the needs for every single person in this list? Or what I kind of set up here in my first go through was, hey, I only care about these specific ones. So I wrote formulas that will work for these. And what I found when I got to some later problems was that I actually need to take this logic and I need to apply it to everybody. So I had to kind of pull it, which it can work. Like I stand by, I often build it up this way. But I did the same thing where I kind of like set up the columns, but in this case, it's just on the case spreadsheet and it's only looking at the specific one. So again, sometimes it might be helpful to look ahead to see what later problems might be coming that you might be getting to, because you could save yourself some time. Like I could have saved myself some time by building this into my data table, which I did. Like if you were to look at my data table, those columns, or at least the that true false influencer, I added in because I found that I needed that on level 7, and I hadn't put that here. So just kind of one of those sort of strategic choices to think about as you're setting things up. And I think that's going to be a theme too of the case I'll walk through later. Is going to have like, when did I shift strategies between some different setups? So something to think about.
Something to point out too is like there's no one way to do a level. There's oftentimes many ways to do it. Like Britt and I, the last 2 levels we did it completely separate. So there's multiple ways you can do something. It's just finding the best fit for you. What fits to your skills with Excel to solve the cases. So are there any questions on if and or combining and having multiple criteria or anything on level 4?
And I'll echo the reading comment, like I completely glossed over because I will, in haste, sometimes just dive into the problem. I missed the comment about needing more than 450 followers. So when I first worked it, not having read it, like I got that one wrong. And I found myself, that's the wall I've hit before in some of my cases, is I'll have misread and I'll either like miss something important or like go down a wrong route and have to divert and waste time in the process. So it usually is worth it to take a few extra seconds to carefully read. Personal experience testifying.
All right, so on to level 5 now. So this is where we started to get a little more difficult with things. So I created a data table. How many of you are familiar with data tables and creating them? So these are big time savers when you're in competitions. I use them often. I use them, especially on the harder levels. All you have to do with data tables is you have to work out the example, and then you can apply all the rules that you did in the example to the final answers. So I'll walk y'all through setting up a data table too. So on level 5, we're given the user ID and the main interest of that user. And we want to count how many users follow of the followers users have that main interest. So I always start with a data table. You don't have to do this, but it's my personal preference is to create a new worksheet. So I'll do each data table for each level in a new sheet. So you start with typing out your example 5 here. So that's what we're given as example 5. And then an XLOOKUP to find the main interest and the user ID is what this is. So we're given the reading, and F1002 is the example 5. From here, what I did here is I copied all of the, and this is again just keeping it simple and working it quick. But I just went back to user data, copied everything in column B, and just pasted it over into my level 5. And I did the same thing on here. This is just the follower list. So column E right here, just again, copy and paste it over here. And then again with the interests, copy and paste. So I have a full list of all user IDs, all the followers, and all their main interests. So next I use the find function. So what we're doing here is we're finding that given user ID, F1002, in everybody's follower list. So if someone follows our given user ID, it'll show up as a number because it'll find that ID within the follower list.
Yeah. And the number represents the character position where it's finding it. So it says, like in that row 10, it's finding F1002 at the 71st position. So sometimes you might actually need to know what position. In this case, Ben just need to know, is it a number or is it blank? And blank indicates it didn't find it.
Yeah, so that, like Britt said, so the number is like what character position they exist in. If it returns a blank, that means that that user that we're given does not follow the does not appear in the follower list of the user we're searching on. So then at the end, it's just a count ifs because it's a count if statement. We want to search on column F, which is our find column, that it's greater than 0, which means that user does have a follower within column E, or column F, excuse me. And then column E, we want to filter it based off the criteria of their main interest is reading. So countifs function of the criteria is the main interest is reading and that they do follow our given user ID. Any questions up to now?
As a reminder, that's just solving for the example. So everything set up works for exactly one input. If he were to change C3 to any other number, like question 81 or 82, it would recalculate, and what he's got in row 8 over there would adjust. Like that's kind of the basic setup for a data table there, is just solving for your one thing.
Yeah, so basic setup for a data table.
Then the magic happens.
And then now to actually do the data table. So I usually do a sequence. So oftentimes we have 20 levels that we're solving for. And we start with level 81, because that's where level 5 starts, is on level 81.
And you can also kind of just copy and paste the numbers from that's how I used to set my data tables too, is like I would just go back over to the case tab, I would grab my selection of like where the numbers was from and copy and paste it over. So that's kind of like the basic one.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we need a range of all of our levels that we need to solve for. So we've solved for the example, but now we need to solve for everything else. So to do that, I'll actually clear this out and show y'all. So I'm going to do what's going to happen is, so if we wanted to change this to level 81, then it'll change our answer over here to 19. And 82, same answer is 19. 83 is 13. So it just changes this cell C3. But to do that dynamically, we want to highlight our entire range, including our answer cell. And then a shortcut for this is Alt-AWT. So that's an important shortcut to know, is Alt-AWT to create a data table. And then we're on a column input, so we want to tab to our column and then select cell C3. That's the one that we're going to change based off of our input cells.
Yeah. And we're on a column input because in the data table that he's got highlighted, the different inputs are in one column. So it took me a while to kind of rationalize that in my head. But because it's in one column, that's your input. And you're just telling it what's changing in the data table that will drive the answer.
And once we've created our data table, we do F9 to refresh. Sometimes it will auto-calculate, but if we do function F9, then it'll solve every level for us and give us all the answers. And then we can just do a copy and then go to our levels and then just paste it into here.
Paste its values or paste a link, kind of whatever your preference is. Has anybody touched the data table before, used it, or seen it? I think it's very powerful. Like once I got this nailed, I think it unlocked a lot for me because you're able to go a lot more in a data table because you only have to focus on solving for the one problem. So you're not kind of limiting yourself to the rows and columns like if you're trying to work off of the case sheet. Yeah. Is there a question here?
Can you go back to the if error find?
Yeah, so again, what this is doing, so we're finding, the find function, we're finding a text within another text. So our main reference is our F1002, that's the user ID we're given based off of example 5. We want to find that within the range of the follower list. So if the F1002 exists in a user's follower list, it'll return the character of where they exist in. Otherwise, it returns a blank because that user doesn't follow them.
Yeah, and Ben input a range, so that D8 through D857, he's input a range. So kind of a simpler version of the formula would just be to put D8 and then copy that formula down. So you're replicating it for each one. So what it's doing is it's finding that F1002 within each cell. So it's looking for a text string. So each cell contains a text string, and so he's input the range, and you'll see it outputs as a spill range. So it's another, I guess, fairly recent-ish addition to Excel is the use of these arrays and being able to build and work with them and output. And so it will output kind of how many ever based on the input. So he put 8 through 857, so you'll see it output if you were to scroll down all the way through 857 as well. But you don't have to input as range. You can do that single cell and copy it down, which is probably a more common, like as you're learning type of thing to understand how it works.
Are there any other questions with level 5 or data tables in general?
Yeah.
Show the countifs.
And so the countifs, it's searching on column FF, which is our find function. If it's greater than 0, so that means that it exists within the range. And then column E to E, we have the criteria that their main interest is reading. So it's an if E to E is reading, so the user's main interest is reading, and they and our given user ID appears in their follower list is when it does a count.
Yes, the countifs I think is really powerful, and my solution, although very different, very much relied on a countifs. So you can have any number of criteria in it, and so it will just figure out like how many things meet essentially all of those criteria.
You're linking reading, right?
Yes, so reading
actual-
comes from our XLOOKUP originally. So we XLOOKUP example 5, and we have it returning 2 rows, or 2 columns, column G and H. So it returns our main interest and our user ID from our given.
That makes it the dynamic.
Yep.
Yeah. And I set up my data table tabs very similar. We were kind of comparing notes earlier where I'll go to a different tab. Usually I'll have, the example number in a column, and then I'll have, depending on how many columns I need of data to bring in from the case file, from that example. So in this case, there were just 2 pieces of information you're given for each of the problems, the reading and then the user ID. And so you can just kind of adjust that to bring in how many ever you want. So I kind of got mine pre-set up. I also for mine, I don't always do this, but I've got my basic template set up to where I've got a space up at the top too if I want to copy in some of the instructions. So, with each level that you get, since you get a new bank of instructions there, and I don't like flipping back and forth between tabs so much, so sometimes I'll just kind of copy that in there. So I've got it up top, so I've got my instructions. Usually I highlight the cell in yellow for that input. I'll bring in the data, and then I'll build my whole model around that. Yeah.
So you have a case when you define a column like E, colon E, and then the other part where you define E8, E857. So, difference between the two.
Yes, there is. So on this function, so the find function, it's a direct reference to the cell, to the range that we want, and that'll return the dynamic array for everything in our range that we want to find on. Whereas in here, this is all just personal preference. Kind of what I found is just when I'm trying to get the final answer, I'll just do a full column reference. Either I'll click when I'm typing it out, I'll click on here. So like if I wanted to just reference the cell, I just click up here and it gives me E to E, or I can just as quickly type E to E.
Yeah, it's probably.
And so that's a lot. To me, that's just saves me some time instead of like trying to find exactly what numbers I'm looking for instead of trying to copy the whole thing. Just a quick reference to the whole column.
Yeah, he should get the same answer if he does like E8 to E857. It's probably technically more computationally intensive to be looking at the whole column, but it's quicker, to Ben's point, to like write that formula to get the final answer. And as long as you're certain that referencing the whole column is not going to bring in extraneous stuff, like that could be the trick. If he was trying to find rows that had a blank in column E or something, he would get the wrong answer because it's going to count a whole bunch of blank rows before the first row he cares about and after the last one. So you do want to be aware of when you're making that choice. But I'll do this kind of the same thing a lot of times of looking up the whole thing. I mean, even in the XLOOKUP in C5, I think you've got the full columns reference, So he's referencing the full one. Like we know that for level 5, the problem numbers only exist in a small range, but he's grabbing that whole column for simplicity, and he knows he's not going to pull anything else. There is no other example 5 in column B anywhere in the case file. There is no other 81, 82, 83, so we know we're safe doing that. But again, you just got to like be aware. Like we know these case files are always set up pretty similarly, so we know that works. But if you're working with something kind of in real life, you do want to be careful about when you're using those ranges, when to use a full column, when to use something that you're more defining, and both can have their uses.
Are there any other questions with level 5? All right.
Never mind.
Okay. So level 6, this is where it's a very similar problem to level 5, but we have another column that we have to filter out for, which is our sex is male or female. So with level 6, it's a very similar setup with our data table. So example 6, an XLOOKUP to return what we're given about that level. And then we have, again, our copy paste range of our user IDs, our follower lists, and our interests. But now we also have a new column, which you can do it in here. I also created in my data over here, but all I did to do the male-female check is the left function. So a lot of times you can use if you need just the first letter in something, left works, or if you need, it also works if you need a given amount of characters of something. So with just needing the first character, because we can look and see every ID starts with an F or an M, and there's nothing more to it. So to keep it simple, it's just using the left function to return FM for everything. And then I just copied and pasted this range over into here. And then again, our find function, so finding our user ID on our follower list. And then in function is very, very similar. We just have that new criteria of our M or F. So very similar, just in adding a new criteria of M or F at the end.
And this is where that data table, Ben created the new tab for level 5, and I do this a lot too, is it makes it easy sometimes to then, create the new tab and just make those modifications that you need. So the modifications he made here, he had to bring in, one additional input on row 5, so he could send that XLOOKUP formula. He had to bring in one more column of data, and then he had to expand that count if function or the count ifs function to have one additional parameter. So it's kind of those modifications, but the setup he had was fundamentally able to be leveraged in. And so sometimes you'll see that that works. Sometimes it's not set up to do that. But in these cases, I think, especially levels of 5 and 6 really built on each other in a way that making that copy helped. And so it was easy to do that with this data table setup. And that's a lot of times why I set up this way too. So I can just copy those tabs and just keep layering on the additional logic, but always retain the original stuff in case I need to troubleshoot. Or maybe when I get to level 7, it's more similar to level 5 than it is to level 6, and I can make the call of, well, which one do I want to start with and modify from there.
Any questions here on level 6? And then level 7 is our final level. So this is where we got a little more tricky with everything. So
yeah, this one was very involved.
This one will
Did anybody touch or even look at this one?
Did anybody get to level 7 at all? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did anybody read through it?
Well, all right, so let's walk through it then. So again, we're going to set up a data table, starting with our example 7 in column C, or address C3, and then XLOOKUP to get all the data we need for the level. So this one is different from the previous levels. So what we want here is which influencer has the most followers that match our criteria.
Versus the prior 2 levels, you were given a specific person and you needed to find information about, who's following that person. In this case, we actually had to do that, but across multiple people.
In this level, especially on the level 7s, there are a variety of ways you can do it. I know Britt and I did them differently.
Very different.
Very differently. So all you do, all I did to start, we want to make sure that we have our year start and end. So we're given a range of for our years, 1995 to 2000. But how do we pull out the specific years? So I use the text before function. So all it is it finds, based off of a given delimiter, all the text before that delimiter. So here the dash is our delimiter, so it finds everything before the dash. And then another thing to call out here is the dash at the start. So what this does is if we didn't use this, it would return our answer in the text before function. It will return it as a text, but we want it as a number, which is important for later on. So if we just return it as a text, it'll give us an error later, which I'll show you guys. But having the dash is important here.
Yeah, and I think I'd call it 2 kind of alternatives here. So the text before and similarly the text after, very powerful formulas or functions that we use quite a lot. I'd also say in this case, left or right can also be helpful because these things are always structured with a 4-digit year, then a dash, and then a 4-digit year. So you can do the left 4 characters and the right 4 characters. But just like text before, left and right are going to output something in text format. So if what you are returning is a number and you want to treat it like a number for the purposes of doing different types of formulas downstream, you do need to convert it to something that Excel will recognize as a value. So that dash just takes the negative of it, It's a little Excel trick that will convert it to a number. You can also wrap it in a value formula. That's what I did when I was working through it, is I wrapped it in a value formula, and that also converts it to a number. So, and I think there's a few other tricks that other people have used, but those are the 2 common ones that I see.
Text after, same thing, just finding after the dash, and then convert it to a number. So these 2 references are going to be important for the next step. So follow along with me here.
With this very simple formula.
So filter is a very powerful formula. We want only users that fall within all of our criteria to be returned. So filter, what we're doing is we're searching on our user data array. So we're searching on column B, and this is what it's going to return in the end, is only values on column B. Then to build our criteria, so the include section. So this is where you build out all the criteria that you want associated with your filter. So we know that their main interest needs to be reading. They have to be male, and then they have to be born after 1995 and before 2000.
And another note on the structure here. So yeah, multiple criteria. You'll see the multiplication sign in between each one. So this is a little trick. The filter formula by default really only accepts 1 criteria. It's only expecting to accept 1 criteria, something that will result in a true or false value. to get it to accept multiple ones, and it won't, I don't think it works with and or. So we're kind of backing into the and or logic. So what we need to know about kind of the true false in Excel is it treats true false as 1, 0. So if you want to have multiple criteria be true, if you multiply them together and the answer is 1, you know that each one of those things was true. If you multiply, 1 times 1 times 1 times 0, so if one of those criteria returns a 0 or a false, the answer is going to be 0. So that multiplication is just the way that we're telling the filter function, hey, we got these multiple things. Each one is going to return a 1 for true or a 0 for false. Multiply them together, and that is the same thing as using an and, sort of logically speaking. And then the or is essentially use a plus, because if you add, and Excel will also accept any non-zero number as a true. So if you were to add these things together instead of multiply them, if it gets 1 or 2 or 3 or how many of a criteria right, as long as it's 1 or greater, it's going to treat that as a true. So kind of a nuanced little trick that has come up in a few places, sometimes in these competitions, but that's kind of what this is set up to do.
That was a great way to explain it too, yeah. So with all of our criteria, it's similar to the countifs, except instead of using a comma between our references, we use equals because we want that column to equal what we're given for our criteria. So we use column F is equal to our main interest. So column F, our user data is our interest. So reference to column F, and tell it to be equal to our C5 value, which is our reading that we're given from our starting data. And then column J, so column J, that was the male-female check that I created. So if column J is an M, and then for dates especially, you have to be careful with how you're using it. So you have to make sure, like, if you want above a date, you're using greater than or equal to, less than a date, less than or equal to. So our last two filters both reference column G because that's our date range, which is another date range that I created. So column G, this is a new column that is just the year that they were born, because that's all we care about really. So using the year function on our column D, which is the date of birth, it returns just the year. And it returns it as a number value. So this is why it was important earlier to convert our starting years with the text functions to be a number value. So it filters it to be greater than the 1995 or less than the 2000. And so at the end of it all, this is the list of users that will be returned from our filter.
Yeah, filter is one of those things. It took me a while to get comfortable with using it, but would recommend definitely diving in, looking at that. You can start a little simpler than this, but you're essentially just, you're just giving it criteria and say, hey, I want to cut that down based on whatever criteria. So test it out, set with like one criteria and see what happens, and then you can build a lot of stuff on it. But it's very powerful.
Are there any questions on the filter function?
I like the vigorous head nod, but no hand. You don't want to ask any of them.
Okay.
You gotta let that one sink in.
So what this does now is it creates a dynamic array, which is very useful for the rest of the data table. So now we're going to do an XLOOKUP. So it's just like any other XLOOKUP. We want to XLOOKUP the user ID and return their follower list. But the big difference here is we want it to be dynamic. So we add a little hashtag symbol after our C9, which is our filter function formula, and that will automatically do an XLOOKUP on everything in the C9 formula.
And the reason that's important here is like example 7, right? We know how many things it outputs, but based on which problem you're doing, that filter function is going to return more or less of the people that meet those criteria. So if you're not careful, then column D, if you were just to do an XLOOKUP on C9 and copy it down those 8 cells or whatever, as you roll through the other problems, all the the other levels, it's not going to go down far enough. And you can solve that by just copying it down as far as you might think it possibly could go, and that can work. But this is, it's linked to that dynamic array functionality within Excel. So because the filter function is outputting an array of data, you can reference it within another formula, and that functionality right there of the dynamic array and being able to reference them is something very powerful in Excel. Really wish it had existed when I first started working in Excel, and all the times that and all the time that we spent making sure that that formulas were copied over far enough and down far enough every month in a monthly workbook or something, you can build stuff using this basic functionality that can really withstand the test of time, and you don't have to constantly be editing, or it risks the manual errors when rolling things forward. So it's not like a real life application, but it's also really fun here.
Any questions on dynamic array in general, or why we use this instead of dragging it down? All right. So next, I have just our list of user IDs, and then now we do our countifs again. So we want to count all the times that the user IDs exist on the followers. Another thing to note, so this is just, so back to where we had our influencer check earlier. This is just a list of user IDs that are influencers. So what I did to get this was we do our filter, and then filter for if they are an influencer, and then I just copied and pasted this range over. There are other ways of doing it. That's just the way I did it for simplicity. But this is a list of all users that are influencers.
You could actually use the filter function to get that list if you wanted to do it dynamically, but he used the filter. So.
And then, again, like we did earlier in the previous levels, it's countifs of if the user ID, how many times it appears in the follower list. And again, so it's okay to do the column D to D reference because we know there's nothing above that's going to cause a miscount in anything. So just how many followers they have. And then another important thing is we want the follower list of everybody that is an influencer. And so this is important for our final check later. So we want to, so the goal is to find which user ID that is an influencer has the most followers within that criteria. So there are 7 of them, or the max is 7. So just max function will return the highest value within a range. And then we want to see who all has 7 followers within that criteria. So we do another filter. This one's a little more simple, but we're filtering column F, which is our influencer users, where column G, which is their followers within the criteria, is equal to our maximum reference, so our 7th value. And so this will return every influencer ID that has 7 followers within the criteria. Is that all making sense? I know it's a lot of the process.
I'm still struggling with having read this and worked it, the followers and the following. Like, I feel like with this level 7, you gotta sit with it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately all this work is just to get down to, okay, who are the people that have the most followers who meet those criteria? So there's all this back and forth, the translating it, but all I was trying to do is get to that and say, okay, we have 3 people. Each of those 3 people has these 7 people. These 7 people are the only people that meet those criteria. So one of these 3 is our answer. And that's where the last piece of logic comes in.
Yeah, so again, so we want to return their name because that's what the final answer is going to be their name. So a dynamic array of the filtered user IDs. And then the final step is we want to know the number of followers they have, because if there are multiple users that fit within that have 7 criteria followers, which one has the most overall followers? That was another rule within our level 7, is if there are multiples that fit the criteria, that we want the one that has the most followers. So it's just an XLOOKUP it's a dynamic array again. So it looks up our user ID on column B and returns column I, which, going back to our user data again, column I is just our follower column that we created earlier. And so that'll return the total number of followers each user has. And then the final step is, so this is a little intensive, and it's because there's an error check later on, but the simple part of it is this right here. It's an XLOOKUP of our max number of followers and returns the name. So max, we want to know which user has the most followers, and then we want to return the name of it. So that's what XLOOKUP max is. Now, there is a particular level that occurs, it's level 127, where, and this is just one of those that it's like, you have to have the final rule to get the case complete. But level 127 actually returns an error. So, and what happens on level 127 is it actually there's no users that fall within the criteria for anybody that's given. So it returns the error. So when this happens, we have to create another XLOOKUP. So we just want the influencer that has the most followers in total, because that's our final rule is if whatever user has the most, but because there's none here, it's just the user that has the influencer with the most followers. So we do an XLOOKUP using max ifs. So max ifs it's similar to count ifs, but it's going to return a max instead of a count. So we're looking up on column I and column L. So we want to find the max on column I over here, which is our followers again, where column L, which is our influencer check, is a yes. So if they do fall under the criteria that they are an influencer, which one is the max number of followers? And then it's just an XLOOKUP to return the name of that person. And then again, like before, we create a data table for all levels 121 to 140, and that'll give us all the answers for level 7. So I know that was a lot to process. Are there any questions on any of it, how anything works in level 7? Any of the formulas I used? Is everybody following still? Did I lose anybody?
Is anybody going to go try out the filter function? Read up on the filter function? That would be my takeaway from this, is read up on the filter function a little bit, because it can have some benefits. So it might take a while for this to sink in.
Finally, let's go over the bonuses real quick. So back up to the top. So we have 5 bonuses. The first one is who's the oldest user in our user data. So all we want to do is an XLOOKUP of, now we're using the min function. So we want to find, so column D is our date of birth column. Let me get rid of this. So column D is our date of birth. So if we want to find the oldest person, who was born at the earliest time. So we're doing an XLOOKUP of the minimum value in column D. And so when we do that, it'll return this person as our oldest person. So again, just simple XLOOKUP.
Yeah. I'll also note here, because I did this one slightly different. I leaned on the fact that XLOOKUP also has the ability to do a close match, and it doesn't have to be an exact match. So if you do an XLOOKUP, I did XLOOKUP and I put a 0, because I'm saying, hey, everything should be greater than 0. And then there's a parameter at the end, which is the match mode. So I said, I want the thing that is either exact, which is not expecting anything, or the next larger item. So it's going to find the smallest date of birth. And that, you need the 0 in there at the front. So you do XLOOKUP 0, comma. I think 0, and get rid of the user data D. That first one. Replace that user data D, colon D with a 0. So XLOOKUP 0 from the date, returning the name. So the second and third parameters stay the same, but then you're kind of leveraging its approximate match functionality. So I use that a few times throughout this case, the approximate match. I use it for a lot of bonus questions in general. You can do like a 0 with that, hey, get the next larger item, which will essentially give the lowest item. You can also do like a really large number. If you knew that, if you wanted to find the youngest user, you could do XLOOKUP and you could have like, 10 billion as your first parameter, and then do the exact match or next smallest item, and it'll get you the same thing. So, well, fun with XLOOKUP.
So the next one is the average number of followings for all female users. So this is an average ifs function. So what this does is it'll find the average given multiple criteria. So we want to average on user data column H, which is our followings column that we created. But we don't want everybody. We only want people that are female. So what we do is we also take the criteria that column J, which is our MF check, is an F. So it'll average everybody, all the followings from H where J is an F. And then an important thing to note here is, and this is something that you'll see a lot of times, is the case asks for you to round to the nearest integer. Also, sometimes it'll ask you to round up or down to the nearest integer. But we have to add that round function on the beginning of it to get it to show as an integer. Otherwise, it can add decimals and it'll throw your answers off and you won't see the correct answer. Then bonus 3. So how many users have more followings than followers? So this is another column we created just specifically for this bonus question. But column K is just a helper column where our formula is simply just if column H is greater than column I, it'll return a 1. So that means that they do have more followings and followers. Otherwise, it'll return a 0. And then at the end of that, it's a count ifs of column K is 1. You can do a sum. There are multiple ways of doing this. I just did a count ifs where our column we just created is a 1. And that returns our 430 for our bonus answer. So then bonus 4, which user's date of birth is closest to the average date of birth. So how I did this one is I took everybody's name and I took their date of birth. It's just copy and paste of everybody's name and date of birth in here. So then I took the average of it. So that's all this function is the average of column B, so average of everybody's date of birth. Now you'll if you notice over here in column B, everything is formatted as a date, whereas now our answer is a number. That doesn't matter for the getting your answer. It still shows us the same thing. This is just what a date in Excel looks like as a number, but it still gives you the same thing in the end. So if I wanted to, I could change the format to a date, and this would be the average date of everybody's birth. And then we create another column over here, our difference. So we want to find which user has the closest date to our average. So how I approached it is I did an absolute value of the average date minus the date of birth for this user, and did it for everybody in the range, so all the way down. And then at the end, we do an XLOOKUP of the min, or like how Britt approached the previous bonus where we XLOOKUP of 0 and return the first smallest item. I just did an XLOOKUP of the minimum on column C, so the minimum difference, and returns the name. Does that all make sense on bonus 4? And then bonus 5, so which letter occurs the most often in the names of the answers on level 7? So to start, we have to take all, so I took all of the answers from level 7, so we have 20 of them, and copy and paste it over here. So to start, we want to get everybody's name as an uppercase letter. A lot of times with Excel, it is what you're doing is case sensitive, and so an uppercase letter versus lowercase letter, it's going to be different. So for this bonus, we want everything as an uppercase letter to make sure that everything is counted appropriately, and we also want to get rid of the spaces. We don't care to have spaces in it, so the way all it is an upper. So upper will translate everything in your string into an uppercase format, and then substitute out the space. So we get rid of the space within our formula and return it as nothing. So this just deletes the space out pretty much. So anywhere there's a space, it's no longer going to exist. And that gives us this uppercase format of everybody's name. And then here's where we're going to use our concat formula again. So we want to concat everybody's name into one string. So now this combines everybody's name. So we have just one big string of everybody's name here. And then we have a sequence of, so we want to get each character as its own thing to be able to count it. There are multiple ways of doing this. I think you can walk through your solution after this. This is just how I approached it. But we want to know how many letters exist. So that's what the len function is. So if we just use len on our string, we have 209 characters total. So we want a sequence of that. So we'll have 1 to 209 now. And then we want to use the mid function. So this is how we return the string or the letter itself at that the location within the concat formula. So we're using the mid function. So we're using mid on our start number is what sequence we're on, and then it only returns one character. So it'll only return, so right here it's just going to go down the list throughout our string and return all the characters as they appear in order, but just as one character now. Then after this, I did a unique function of it. So I did a unique of everything in column F. And so that'll only return each letter one time. And the reason we do that is now we can do a count ifs of it. So how many times did this letter appear in a range? So it's a count ifs on column F, where that value is our lookup value. So it's a dynamic array here. So if we just did H3, it would only count how many E's we have in our range. But dynamic array, so now it'll look at how many times each letter appeared in our concatenated string. And then to end it all off, it's just an XLOOKUP of our max value. Or again, you can do like Britt says earlier and just XLOOKUP a large number and find the next smallest item. And so this will return our which letter has appeared the most times in our string, which is letter A. And so that's the way I saw for bonus 7. Do you want to walk through how you did it too? Or?
Cover it later. I think we are hitting up lunch.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll move into lunch right now. But Ben and Britt, thanks for making hard things look easy. We're gonna we'll have some time for questions here in just a minute, or maybe later. I need to. The first things first. We'll take a question in just a minute. We're going to have a student panel during lunch, and so those 5 of you students that are doing that panel, would y'all go ahead and just head out and grab your lunches so you can eat? And then after that, we'll go ahead and take a question or so right now while they're filling their plates, and then we'll all go get stuff, and then we'll have some time for questions later as well. And of course, these folks will be here for our second master class later as well. Was your question about the case, or?
Yes, one quick question. How far did you get in 30 minutes?
I didn't actually time myself because I had my 2 daughters running around the house at the same time, so I was starting and stopping. But
I think my time was about 19 minutes.
Oh.
I don't think I would have done it that fast.
Any other questions? Other questions right now for these folks?